in this week's module, we're going to be talking about read-alouds. And read-alouds are a technique to help students gain knowledge through text across the content areas. One of the questions that you may ask yourself is, why do I want to read aloud to my students? Well, in the 1980s, the Carnegie Foundation sponsored a huge research study to look into what students need to do to be more successful in reading. And one of their findings was that the single most important activity for building the knowledge required for eventual success in reading is reading aloud to children. Now, that might not be a big surprise to us, because for many years we've heard that we should be reading aloud to our children when they're young. But the Commission went even further in their findings when they said that reading aloud should be done not only in the home, but also in the classroom, and that it's a practice that should continue throughout the grades. Now, you may remember being a young student in school and having your kindergarten or first or second grade teacher read books aloud to you, but what the Commission is suggesting is that students are never too old to be read aloud to. I've often used read-alouds even with my college students at the university level, so we never get too big to be read to. How do you select books to read for read-alouds? Well, there is a wonderful book that we'll be introducing you to in this module called The Read Aloud Handbook by Jim Trelease. And he's done many different editions of this book, and it's the Bible of reading aloud to students. And it not only tells you lots of suggestions on how to do it better, but it gives you lots of suggestions of what kinds of books and what are some really good books to read aloud to students. When you're selecting books, Erickson has said that we should look at 4 things. First of all, we want books that are going to hold students' interest. We want something that they're going to be engaged in, that they can't wait to hear what's going to happen next. So we want to keep that in mind as we're trying to select books. I found in my classroom when I was working with 7th graders that I had to choose books that my boys would like, because the boys would not necessarily engage with the books that girls engaged with, but girls would engage with the books that boys would engage in. It worked for me. Perhaps it will work for you as well. A second criteria that we want to use in selecting books is that we want to choose books that will stimulate discussion, because that's how we gain in our knowledge of our content area, is by having books that make us think and make us talk about the issues that are involved with whatever subject that we're trying to learn about. The third criteria that Erickson suggests is that the books we select should reflect authors from many cultures. Our classrooms are more multicultural every day, and it's important that students learn about other cultures, and one way that they can do that is through literature. We see that other cultures oftentimes have things that are very much like our own culture, and that helps us point out ways that we're alike as well as ways that we're different. I also think it's essential that students from other cultures have a chance to read books about kids that look like them and think like them and have the same culture as them. It makes a huge difference. And then finally, we want to make sure that we match the book's social and emotional levels with those of the listeners. So we don't want a book that's too difficult for our students, nor one that's too easy. Trade books are a great way to introduce read-alouds in the classroom. Trade books take students to different times and places in ways that textbooks can't. By telling stories or using great illustrations or catchy phrases, they're able to engage the students much more readily than a textbook can. It helps the students become emotionally invested in the story and what's going on. They begin to understand the issues that are taking place, and they begin to become a part of that time when we read a trade book to them. It also allows the teacher to expose students to a variety of genres and resources of information. not only can you read just trade books, but you can read newspaper articles, magazine articles, fiction books, nonfiction books. All of those together just broaden the scope and the variety that you use in your classroom to get ideas across to your students. And finally, a trade book serves as a magnifying glass that helps them enlarge and enhance their interaction with a subject. It piques their interest. It makes them want to go deeper. It helps students want to learn more about whatever topic that they're talking about. Trade books are a wonderful complement to textbooks. They can provide more depth than perhaps your textbook can do. They can help provide more up-to-date information. We only adopt textbooks every 8 to 10 years, and so many times the information in those textbooks may become dated. Using trade books is a way to keep them current. Trade books can help students connect emotionally, we mentioned before, and it moves their minds and their hearts while it does so. Trade books can make information more accessible to students. Trade books come in a wide variety of reading levels, and so by accumulating a collection of trade books across a variety of reading levels, we can find things that students can use to read on their own. It helps them to find a book that they can read at their own reading level, or a book that challenges them to find more information about the topic that they're reading. It also provides exposure to expository text, and it can most importantly, motivate students to read more. One type of trade book that we might use in the classroom is picture books. We think of picture books again as kindergarten, first, second grade, but picture books today have become much more detailed, and they address a much broader age group than in the past. With a picture book, the picture and the text work together to tell a story, and many of these picture books are simply works of art on their own. There are 4 different categories of picture books. The first category is wordless books, and these are books that are just simply pictures with no text at all, and they can provide for very rich discussion in your classroom. The second category are picture story books, and these books have beautiful pictures with a minimum amount of text, or maybe even single words that help tell stories. And then there are picture books with minimal text. They have a little bit of text, but again, the pictures are what carries the book. And finally, we have what we call illustrated books, where we have more text, but there are pictures that supplement that text as we go along. And all of these categories of books can be used in all content areas to help students learn the content. One technique that we can use for read-alouds in the classroom is the use of reader's theater. And reader's theater is an oral presentation of a script by 2 or more readers. Think back to when you were in elementary school and you were reading plays. And most kids really like to read plays because it's different and they get to take on the roles and they get to read aloud and they enjoy doing that. Well, think of reader's theater as that type of situation magnified even more. Because with reader's theater, it's much easier to carry it on in your classroom. There's no props. There are no costumes. The students don't have to memorize their lines. You don't have to block your stage directions out on a stage. And so it becomes a very easy to use technique in your classroom for reading text aloud to students. One of the things that I like about reader's theater is the fact that students who are reading a particular role in reader's theater have to read their parts fluently and with appropriate dramatic flair. So this really helps students to develop prosody or reading with feeling. I've found that even struggling readers who are going to perform in Reader's Theater become very committed to reading their parts over and over again so that they develop prosody in their reading and they won't be embarrassed by their reading when they do the Reader's Theater for their peers or for an audience. So that can be very beneficial in your class as well. And finally, with Reader's Theater, the scripts come in a variety of genres as well. There are folk tales, there are narrative tales, and there's nonfiction across all the content area. And in this module this week, we're going to try to look at some of those sites that can help you find Reader's Theater regardless of your content area. So how do we go about reading text aloud in class? The screen that you're looking at right now shows you 7 ways that you can read aloud to students in class. And these are a continuum of strategies. They go from read alouds, in which the teacher has the most control, she's simply reading aloud to the students in her class, to independent reading, where the teacher has the least amount of control. And as you go down this continuum, it can serve as a scaffolding in your classroom so that you start off with lots of support reading aloud to students, but you gradually reduce that scaffolding as students become more proficient so that you get to the point where they're actually reading independently, which is what our goal is to all students.